Hello everyone, welcome back to our shopping cart series. In today's video, we will understand and implement the useReducer hook. UseReducer hook is a very powerful hook in React for managing complex state logic. But before we dive into understanding the useReducer hook, let's understand some of the key concepts like what do we mean when we talk about state, action, and reducer functions in general. So to fully understand useReducer, we first need to understand what state and action mean primarily. The state in React is essentially the data that a component manages and displays. It determines what users see and interact with. For instance, let's have a look at our code. So for instance, in a product list page, we are managing a state variable called products, which is a list of products which we populate, and then that is used to display list of products that we have on our landing page screen. Similarly, on other components, for example, in product details page, we can see that we are managing another state, which is the individual product that we want to showcase in the details section. Now, in terms of useReducer, the state represents all the data that the reducer will manage. It is usually defined as an object. Okay, now we have our understanding of what is state. How do we manage it? At the component level, at least. Now, coming to action. An action is an object that describes a change you want to make to the state. For example, let's have a look at our application. So in our application, as we can see, we have the product listing page, and on clicking of this, you're performing an action. And what does that action signify? That you want to view details for this product, and the type of action is view product, and you're also sending some information, which is the product ID. And that ID is automatically populated in the navigation bar, and we are able to get the information using the React Router DOM hooks that we are using in our application. So that state we don't have to explicitly manage because that's handled by the overarching router that we have configured in our application. But now coming back to home, we have additional functionalities related to cart which are not driven by route or any other logic. So this also is an action. Here an action signifies a change that you want to make in the current state of the application. So when I click on add to cart, ideally we should be adding the product to cart. So this is an action of add to cart, and what would be the object that we are interested in when we are performing this action? It would be current product on which I am clicking on the button. So whenever I'm clicking on add to cart button on this backpack should be added to my cart. Similarly, whenever I'm clicking on add to cart for this jacket, it's this jacket that should go in my cart, not the ring below. So these are some of the things, and these are the key properties as well. Whenever you look at a state, it will have two major properties. One would be a type. Type signifies what type of action do you want to do on your application. And then there would be a payload property. Payload property would signify what is the data that we are interested in when we are performing that action on our state. So that's why usual definition of a type looks like you will have a type and a payload. We'll get into it when we start developing it. Now, with this understanding of state and actions, let's understand what is a reducer function. So, a reducer function, as name signifies, is a function and it reduces two inputs into a single output. And how does it look like? So, this is your reducer function or reducer method. There are two inputs that would go inside. One would be the state. It could be the initial state when your application is starting up, or the current state of your application. For example, you already have 4 products in your cart. In that case, the state would signify the current state of 4 products. And then action would be any number of actions that you have configured in your application that could be performed on that state. So since we are dealing with a very specific state of cart, you can perform actions like add to cart, remove from cart, and so on. So those are the two inputs that reducer function will take, a state and an action. And basis that, it will perform that action on the state and give you an updated state. So it gives you a completely new state object. That way, React's immutability is also taken care of, and it automatically gets a new instance of an object and refreshes the views accordingly wherever we are consuming these state and actions. Now, let's have a brief look at our application again. So, what are the various actions that we can perform on our cart state? One definitely would be add to cart. Now, if you are adding something, we should also have the provision to remove the item from cart. That would be another one. And then I should have the option to buy multiple quantities of a product. For example, I want to buy 3 t-shirts. Then I should be able to update the quantity of a product. So we'll try to implement these 3 actions on our state. And what would be those actions? So the various actions that we are targeting today are adding the product to cart, increasing the product quantity or decreasing the product quantity, and removing the product from cart. So these are the three actions that we will target to develop today. And before we dive into development, let's have a look at the current state of our application and what have we done so far. So very briefly, we have created a project structure. We have created the appropriate routes and folders have been created. The product listing page, details page are available and are wired in using the routes. So as we can see, your home page is your product listing page. Then based on the product ID, you can see details of any of the products. And then we have a cart page, which right now just has a button, static button there. If you were following the series along, you would already have this set up on your machine. In case you were not following till now, I have attached the link to a starting project in the description. Please download the project and you can start from today. As long as you understand the major concepts and the key concepts like what is React, what are the various important hooks and all. If not, I'll attach a link of the video in information section. Please get started from the very beginning. You can reach all the way to this point and start developing alongside. Now let's go ahead and start creating the reducer, its implementation. So in case the reducer folder does not exist, please create the reducers folder under src. And in this, we will create a new file, which would be called partreducer.ts. Let us close everything else. And we are interested in one more update, which would be update to the product model. So right now we are only dealing with products. And as I mentioned, when we are dealing with cart, we would also have the need to increase the quantity of the products that we have in cart. So we would create a new interface, cart item, which extends your product. And the only thing it would add on top of it would be your quantity, which would be of type number. So here we are set and our new cart item now exists, which we can consume in our reducer and other applications. Now we will create an interface. It would be cart state. So we have to manage a state. That's where we would be performing all the updates to our application. And for now, let's keep it really simple. It will just have an items key, which would be an array of cart items. So import cart items, and this will be our cart state. Now, what are the various actions that we are dealing with? So for that, we'll create a new union type action. And in this, as I mentioned, it would have two key properties. One would be type, and this should be add to cart. And payload, let it be null for now. And then we'll duplicate it to configure the remaining two actions. So one is definitely add to cart. Second one would be remove from cart. And then update quantity. Okay, so we will be able to update the quantity. Now, let's try and identify the payloads that we will need for each of them. So whenever we are adding the product to cart, what would we need? We would actually need a product of cart item type because we need the product along with the quantity information. And that's what we have here. So if you have a look, product with quantity is your cart item. So this would be of type cart item. Now, when you want to remove a product from cart, do we need the entire cart item? No, we don't. What do we need? We just need the ID of the product that we want to remove, and remaining logic can be handled at the reducer level. So this would be of type number, which would be your product ID. And similarly, update the quantity as well. We only need the ID to update the quantity. And with this, we have our initial state blueprint and actions ready. Now, we will create an initial state, which would be of type cart state. And let's initialize with an empty array. Why typecasting is really important is, it is possible that you could make a typo here. And if you don't cast it properly, then you won't be able to catch these errors. That it will understand that it's an item that is of type array, but it won't be able to map it to the state blueprint that we have created. And that's why typecasting is really important and appropriate type definitions are really important. Now let's go ahead and create a reducer function. So function name would be partReducer. Before we dive into coding the reducer, you must be thinking that why do I actually need to implement a reducer? I do have my state variables in my components, the pages that we saw, and we can just add the current logic, required logic on top of the current state and get away with it. But as our application grows, Right now you have only 3 or 4 set of components. As your application grows, managing multiple related pieces of state with useState will become very complex. You would have to define a lot of props, send a lot of callbacks, handle a lot of events that user is working with. And then events like adding, removing, or updating items in your shopping cart would require you to write separate functions for each of the updates, making code very less maintainable and a lot more duplication across the components. So with useReducer or this reducer based implementation, you will be able to centralize the logic where you want to make the updates to happen on your state and then consume it from the appropriate central state. And that makes it really easy. So instead of handling multiple 4 or 5 different instances of a component, you're handling a single state in a single place. That makes it much more maintainable and clear from the perspective of another developer who would be looking at your code. Now, in large applications, it's always helpful to name reducers based on the functionality. Because, for example, cart reducer is the one that we are creating here. So this will specifically manage the data related to cart. In case of a large application, you could also have a user reducer where you are managing user related data, or chat reducer where you would be managing details related to various chat windows that are open and which one is active, which one is working on, how long since it has been idle. So those sort of things, it would become very messy to manage in a single state, and that's why it's preferred and recommended approach to break down your application into smaller states. So with that, now we'll start populating our reducer. And as I mentioned, the first input would be state. It takes in 2 inputs and reduces them to one output. So first would be state, which would be of type card state. And by default, if you're using it, you can also initialize it as initial state. So that way, in case you don't pass any state, it will take the initial state as the starting point. So, and then action, which would be of type action, or let's rename this to cart action to make it much more clear. So action of type cart action. It would be the output of this reducer function. It would be again cart state. So it will perform some actions on this state and return the new state with the updates made. And now we will implement switch. And what would we deal with? It would be action dot type. Now, what are the various cases that we'll deal with? One definitely would be add to cart, and this is where TypeScript comes in really handy. You see, with proper type definitions attached to our code, we can see these are the 3 types of action types that we can deal with in our reducer. It's very clear and evident. And let's add them one by one. So one, I'll duplicate this, and the next one would be remove from cart, and the third one would be update quantity. One thing which we need to do, ensure that switch types are handled appropriately. So now we are seeing this error because we are not returning the state. So for that, what we can do is default, just return the state as is. In case you don't get any matches, return the state. And now whenever we are adding a product to cart, what do we need to do? If the product does not exist, we will add it to cart. But in case the product is already in cart, we will increase the quantity by 1. So if you press on add to cart button 2 times, I want to add 2 quantities of this jacket in my cart. So let's implement that. So what do we need to do first? We will check if item in cart. If it's already in cart, how do we find that? So state dot items, because all the cart items would be pushed into this items array. And we can find item if items ID is equals to action dot payload dot ID. So in case your item that you're trying to add is same as the one of the items that is available, we'll return that in item in cart. And if item is in cart, so one thing which we need to ensure is that we are always returning state. So how do we return a new instance of state? We destructure the current state object, and then we override the items array that exists right now. So here, how do we override it for? And remember that this we are dealing with when the item is already in cart. So for state.items map, for the item that matches the action.payload.id, what do we need to do? We need to spread out the item and then update the quantity by item.quantity plus 1. So if you click on that button once again, the add to cart button, it will increase the quantity by 1. Okay, for all the items that do not match, we return the item as is. We don't touch or disturb them. And then If item is not in cart, in that case, what do we need to do? We just need to return the state with new item array where we have all the existing items along with the payload that was sent. So here you see, now you've added the item successfully in cart. How do we remove item from cart? We can just filter out the item that matches the ID that was passed. So here again, since we always need to return the state, we destructure the state, and then for the items, state.items.filter. And which items do we want to keep? We want to keep all the items where ID is not equal to our action.payload. So now you'll be able to remove an item. For example, you pass the item number 1 as item to be removed, item with ID 1. It'll keep every item which does not have ID 1 and remove the one that has the matching ID. Now for update would be very similar to what we have here, but in this case, we are making an update to the existing product. We don't have to check whether item is in cart or not. We know that item is in cart, and for the item that is in cart, what do we have to do? And as you can see, for update quantity, it's telling the TypeScript is telling us that ID does not exist on type number because payload is explicitly declared as whenever I want to update quantity, I will send the payload, which would be number. So ideally, this should not be just number because number is the updated quantity, but on which product do we want to send? So that would be product ID should be of type number, and then quantity would be of type number. This would be the updated payload. So whenever we want to update the quantity, it should be product ID and quantity. And wherever item ID is equals to the product ID, in that case, take the quantity which is coming from the payload. So action dot payload dot quantity. So we update the quantity as it is, whatever was sent in the payload. Else, we return the items undisturbed. So for the matching products, we update the quantity. For anything that does not match the ID, we return the item as is. And here, your reducer function is completely ready. Now, let's implement the useReducer hook. For that, we will go to our product list page. And what is the call signature of our useReducer hook? It's const. It returns a tuple, and it will be useReducer from React. You import it. And then the first parameter is the reducer function, and the second one is the initializer or the initial value of the array. But for that, we need to ensure that we are exporting our reducer function from here. So let's export, and let's export cart action as well in case we need. And let's export the initial state as well. So now all of these requirements are exported, and we'll go ahead and assume the cart reducer and initial state. And what does it give you as an output? So it gives you a state and a method using which you can dispatch all the actions that you need. And what type of actions would you be able to dispatch? You will be able to dispatch all of these 3 actions which we've declared here, whenever we are using this particular useReducer with the appropriate reducer and initial state configured. Now, how do we test that out? For that, just temporarily, we will update our product type. We will take a dispatch, which would be of type react.dispatch. And what type of actions would it take? It would be dispatching cart action. And this is a mandatory property now. And whenever an add to cart happens, we will on click handle add to cart. And let's define this method. And here, what do we want to do? First, we need to destructure the dispatch. And then you can dispatch the event. Dispatch. What do we need to send? First would be type. Which type of action do we need? We want to add to cart. And then what would be the payload? The payload would be of type product. And then quantity is needed because it is of type cart item. So you set the quantity to 1 by default whenever you're adding it for the first time. And then automatically we are ensuring that when add to cart is triggered, it'll update the quantity by 1. So initial time it'll take the quantity as 1, and the next calls it'll keep on increasing them. Now you will get an error in product list page because we are not passing the dispatch method. It's a mandatory prop now. So let's dispatch and dispatch. And just to see if this useReducer is working as we expect it to, what we will do, we will create a use effect. This use effect should run every time there is an update to our state object. And here what we would do, console.log state was updated, we log the state. So what we've done so far is we've added a method handle to cart. We've added a prop to our product tiles where we are passing the dispatch method from the parent now. And in the handle add to cart method, we are calling this dispatch method with add to cart functionality and passing the required payload type. And from here, we created a use reducer. From the tuple, we are taking the state and dispatch, passing the dispatch method, and whenever the state would be updated, we are logging the updated state. Let's have a look at our application and open the console. I'll go ahead and zoom in. And from here, let's refresh. Initially, you should see two logs with items as 0. We are seeing two logs because we are running React in dev mode. This is something I've already covered in one of the previous foundational videos. In case you're not aware, just go through the video. But now I added an item, which was this t-shirt. And you see, ID2 men's casual premium t-shirt is now available in our cart. I'll add one more. And now there would be two items available, which is your t-shirt and your cotton jacket. Now I'll go ahead and click on this t-shirt one more time. Right now the quantity of this t-shirt is 1. I click on this. The item remain 2. It's not adding another item because the item already exists in cart. And the quantity for this item, the t-shirt that we clicked on again, was increased by 1. And this will keep on happening. If we click on it multiple times, you will see the quantity for that particular product would increase by the appropriate amount. So now it's 5 quantities of the product. And that way you see the code is very much centralized. Now we can see it's much more readable. You have the entire logic for your state related updates in one place, and it's easier to maintain. It's easier to update and gives you a complete picture that, okay, for my cart action, I only have these three: add to cart, remove from cart, and update quantity. In this, centralization helps us write our code much more effectively and also helps us write a much cleaner code. You see, the product list page, if you see, is independent of any other logic. So it's just taking out the dispatch method, and using that, we can update the quantities, update the cart section, a different section in our application altogether using the use reducer hook. So that's it for today's video. You are able to complete the implementation and you're able to see the updates. So we understand the use reducer. Now, if you have to pass this, as you saw, we are doing this through props right now. And I want to avoid prop drilling as much as possible, because if you have multiple child components and you need dispatch method at the fourth level of the component, you would have to send that prop down the tree a lot. That is called prop drilling. And that's something that we should avoid whenever the component structure is a little complex. In the next one, we'll make our state even more reusable by using the use context hook. And this will decouple our components, and we won't have to do any more prop drilling, and we'll be able to seamlessly pass state and dispatch methods to the respective components wherever needed. And that is something that we'll do in the next section. Hopefully you were able to complete this entire implementation. In case you have any doubts or have trouble understanding something, please let me know in the comments, and I'll probably cover that in much more detail to build a better foundation for all of us. Because as a developer, you need to have very clear foundations. You need to understand some of the concepts very clearly, and this is one of those concepts. And this is something that's not very exclusive to React. If you're using any framework or library, Angular has its own state management and GRX. Similarly, Vue has its own. In React, there are multiple state management frameworks available. So for simple states, useReducer works really well. But for complex states, you have Redux, you have Zustand, and other similar frameworks which you can use. And that's something that operates under the same concept, under the same umbrella of a reducer function, an immutable state, and an action to update that state. And once you get a hang of this, it will become really easy to translate that knowledge into different frameworks and different libraries. So thank you for joining today. Hope you had a great one. See you in the next one.